Welcome to Commander Central, episode 301. And today we'll be taking a look at the listener submissions for the Rifties from 2021. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Hey, gentlemen, how's it going today?
It is bleepity bleeping cold outside.
I need to go shovel my driveway out here, and I'm kind of putting it off and hoping it gets slightly warmer, but I'm not sure that's going to happen.
I mean, we're in a wind chill advisory tonight for like double digit below zero before the wind, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm not excited. I keep doing that thing already where I'm telling myself, I'm like, all right, well, it's already kind of, a third of the way through January, so we only have another, month and a 2/3 left, and then it's March, and it starts getting nice. So I'm rationalizing away winter already. Anyone get any games in this week?
Negative.
Sure wish I did, but I did not.
Chris was at the shop on Tuesday, but he was looking for places to mount televisions on the walls.
Yeah, pretty much. That was quite amusing.
I played a couple on stream. I got to take my Anax deck out for a ride and won a couple games with it, so that's been fun to play. I did have a situation where it was kind of funny. I was playing my Glissa deck, and I was doing fine, but I didn't have a very scary board state, and there was a couple other players that were popping off. So I was not a threat at all, but I didn't have much else to do, so I played a Revel in Riches. And I'll play it and pass a turn. And then the next player dropped an Elish Norn, but someone else had a bunch of zombies out in a Wilhelt that makes zombies when zombies die. So this loop happened where 11 creatures died, and then the Wilhelt made 6 more creatures off that all died to the Elish Norn immediately anyway. So, and then, something had Undying, so it died and came back and died again. So I made 24 treasures just accidentally. And then I'm the threat. And then everyone's like, uh-oh, he's at 24 treasures. We better kill Dana. And I'm like, I didn't do anything. I was just sitting here. I mean, I was obviously the target. You got to kill me or I'm going to win the game with the Revel in Riches with 10 treasures on my upkeep. But what a weird way to turn into the threat by just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. And all of a sudden you're the person everyone has to kill.
And that's what they call guilty by association.
Yeah, very much so. And they were right. You have to kill me. And even at one point, I was like, I can just sacrifice a bunch of treasures. They're like, nah, we're going to kill you anyway. I'm like, all right, well, that's fair.
That's so not fair. You didn't even instigate any part of that whole thing, and then they're just like, oh, forget the Elish Norn, that caused this whole problem. Let's kill the person who's just sitting there having a good time.
Yeah, well, it is what I mean. And of course, it's not like that deck is bad. I was probably going to eventually do something, whatever. It's fine. But just a funny way to suddenly you are the villain. But yeah, I had some good games. I had a good time at the shop this week, so I got to play some fun games on stream last night, and my Anax deck won a second game last night, so
Nice.
Deck's been way better than I thought it was going to be for a mono red deck with no instants or sorceries.
Is that the one that you came up and asked me for the Satyr tokens for?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
And I don't even make many satyrs with it. It's just, everything I drop makes Anax bigger, so just the way the deck works, everything kind of makes my commander, puts it in a position to one-shot you. And I was playing it last night, for example, and I had Elena, the partner commander in my hand, the red one, who taps where you add red mana to your mana pool equal to the power of the biggest creature that came into play this turn.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, I'm not going to play Anax right away. Since I have her, I'll get her out first, and I'll play Anax and be able to tap her for 5 or 6 mana or something. So I kind of slow rolled Anax, but then I got a Hammer of Perforos out, so she had haste. So the turn she came into play, she tapped for 4 mana just off herself, because she was the biggest creature that turn. Then the next turn I was going to play Anax, but then I drew an Atali, Primal Storm, excuse me. So I played Atali, and it had haste from the Hammer of Perforos, so I could swing and get the three permanents off that. And then she tapped for 6 mana off of Atali coming into play, so I dropped a bunch more things. And the following turn, when I played Anax, he came into play as an 18-3, so then she tapped for 18 mana, and I was able to swing with him, and with the 18 mana, I played the Neheb, where you add mana to your mana pool based on how much damage you did.
Yeah.
So... Sorry, I made 18 off Anax, played my hand, swung with Anax, hit somebody for 18, and then I had 18 more mana to play in my second main phase in a mono red deck.
The worst part about that is that you can't really recover once you blow your hand.
I was out of gas, right? It was basically I'm going to kill everyone next turn, or someone's going to board wipe and I'm just done. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, let's see how much we can generate at once.
Right. But it was fun. I mean, you're just seeing dumb things happen, and those kind of glass cannon decks are always fun too, because, it's not inevitable. If the person can stop you, then you're probably screwed. So yeah, that felt good.
Mm-hmm.
If you out there in the listener land played some fun games or want to tell us about anything cool going on in your new year, how'd you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central, and you can find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central. Check out our reward tiers such as a Decks You Play show, or just joining our community to chat with us and play some virtual EDH. This week we want to say hello and welcome to our new patron, Kyle Balco.
Well, thank you to Kyle, and thanks to all our patron supporters, both new and old, and to just our listeners in general. Thanks to everybody out there. It means a lot. We really do appreciate it. The one bit of news I guess we have worth mentioning this week is another secret lair was announced. We're getting a bunch of basic lands with Aquarius-themed stuff based on astrological symbols that are going to come out every month throughout the course of the year. I think it's 5 of one type of land per set. What was that, Chris?
I said, heck yeah. I'm looking this up right now.
Yeah, the art's pretty cool. And again, we say this every time, but I'll say it again. This is, kind of a perfect product for the most part. If you don't want it, you don't got to do it. Maybe it's kind of expensive, and I get not liking that, but it's just, it's a skin. There's a gazillion basic land choices. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. And if you like them, you can pick them up. So the art looks really cool on them. I like the theme, for sure. And it's going to be a thing throughout the year. So those are kind of fun. But that's basically it. It's this is kind of the quiet time of year. We haven't quite hit Kamigawa spoilers yet. We had a few that they revealed a couple weeks back. That's about it. And we won't probably get anything for 2 weeks officially. There's been a few unofficial leaks we won't go into. But yeah, so things will probably be pretty quiet for the next few weeks, so we can do some shows that aren't talking about new cards, which is always kind of fun and a change of pace lately, it seems like.
And then, the proverbial phrase, and I'm sorry, but I'm about to swear to all my listeners, but all hell's about to break loose.
Very much so, yes. So before it breaks loose, let's take a look at what the listener submissions were for the Rifties here. We talked about what our favorite cards were, but we put something out there with our AMA for listeners to submit what cards they liked the best from 2021. And actually, there's a lot of really interesting ones here, ones that I liked throughout the year too, and we liked, but you have to make a choice, and we couldn't pick all of them. But I do want to talk about a lot of these because there's a lot of fun cards here. So I want to start with you, Max. Why don't you go over the lands that people submitted here to us?
Yeah, so we had a bunch of different lands submitted. The one being that we talked about was Treasure Vault, Hive of the Eye Tyrant, Tyrate Sanctum, the Pathway Cycle we discussed a little bit, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, Chris's pick of Urza Saga, the World Tree, the Hunt and Vow lands, and then the Snow Duels were all submitted from our listeners.
And those were almost all cards I played in somewhere. I don't think I ran Hive of the Eye Tyrant, but I did run the white one, the Frostworm, Lair of the Frostworm, I believe, in a deck. Creature lands are always useful. This is one that the listener mentioned. It's Graveyard Hate. And yeah, it turns into a creature that knocks something out of a graveyard when it attacks. Those lands are always useful depending on what your deck is doing.
Yeah, none of these lands at all that we have on this list, surprised me when I looked at them.
No, Tyrate Sanctum was one. That's the one where you can spend 2 mana to make a target legendary creature a god and put a counter on it, and then you can spend 4 to sacrifice it and put an indestructible counter on a god, which might well be the creature you just used. If you're playing a deck with a bunch of gods in it, you can just make your god indestructible. You can turn one of your creatures to a god. You're putting a counter on a thing too, so +1 counter decks sometimes want that ability. It's just a good land. Yavimaya is as well. I picked up a bunch of copies of that. I think I put it in most of my green decks, if not all of my green decks, just because, if the worst case thing it does is turn all your lands into dual lands, it's still worth it. It doesn't have to do Urborg things where it makes Cabal Coppers busted. It can just be a land that makes your lands better.
Yeah, it's not bad by any means. The only thing I don't like about it is that it doesn't have that broken aspect to it.
Sure.
So, the point of playing like Cabal Coffers is, a lot of creatures have Swamp Walk, or not Cabal Coffers, pardon, but Urborg is that, creatures have Swamp Walk, or you can use Cabal Coffers, to break things off of that. But like Yavimaya, all you're doing is you're fixing your opponent's mana.
Right.
The worst case scenario. So, overall, it's not bad to put in, but it doesn't give you the huge amount of value that Urborg does.
The World Tree is on here. That's the one, It comes into play taps for green, and if you have 6 or more lands you control have tap and add 1 mana of any color. It also has a WUBRG ability for 2 of each color. You can sacrifice and insert your library for any number of god cards, put them on the battlefield, and shuffle your library.
I have seen that be cracked before and watched someone put like 40 gods on the field, and I said,
man.
This was dumb. How did we let this happen?
Yeah, this is one I understand. If you are playing kind of a budget 5-color deck, it's a nice way to fix your lands. On the other hand, I think generally speaking, WotC's already made it too easy to play 5-color decks by printing commanders like Kenrith or Golos, which I guess is now banned, but things like that like are 5-color commanders that don't require you to play 5 colors basically, or at least let you not have a good land base or be lazy with your land base and still have access to every color. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I like World Tree because it helps people play 5 colors if you don't have a gazillion dollars in lands, but if you do have a gazillion dollars in lands, it just makes things maybe too easy for you. So it kind of feels a bit like that Tulane thing where like it's a great commander for a new player because it does all the things they want and it helps them maybe play on parity with somebody who's an experienced player and a good deck builder. But when you put it in the hands of somebody who's already an experienced deck builder and a good player, it's just maybe too strong. That's how I feel about the World Tree a little bit. Like it's a great way to make it easy to play 5 colors, but if you're already somebody playing with like a perfect 5-color deck, it just is unnecessarily powerful.
Yeah,
So
when I had my 5-color Kenrith deck, I played this in there, and I don't think I ever saw the card, so I couldn't give like a,
sure.
My personal, view on it. But I put it in there just for the simple fact of, yeah, it is super easy. Why not have a free land drop, like a land drop that can free fix my mana colors if I have the right amount of lands out?
It's almost too bad it has that WUBRG ability on there. It would be nice just as a fixing land, as kind of a Chromatic Lantern or something to run in a 3 or 4 or 5-color deck.
That would be broken there.
Well, but I mean, like because of the WUBRG ability, you're stuck playing it on only 5 colors. You can't play it in like a 4-color deck or a 3-color deck, and it would be nice just to have that as an option. But you can't do it. So, and maybe it would be too powerful. That could be.
I mean, I would jam that in every deck that I played that was more than 2
Probably.
colors that was playing green.
I'd probably play
even in 2 colors.
Exactly. I probably played in 2-color decks at that point. So maybe that makes sense too. So, any thoughts on any of these, Max? Before we move on to instance.
No, you guys pretty much covered them. I mean, these are all lands I don't run, so I don't plan on running. The World Tree, they're all good. There's reasons we probably didn't pick them, but I'm glad someone else did.
Yeah. We'll go to the instance next. We had Baleful Mastery, which is the black removal spell that you can cast for 2 less, and if you do, person gets to draw a card, but it doesn't have to be the person whose creature you exiled. I think Baleful Mastery is fantastic. We had Semester's End, which is a way to blink creatures and planeswalkers. A Plummet Forbidden, which is a way to you can sacrifice when you cast it, you can sacrifice 1 or more creatures and you draw a card and lose a life for each creature sacrificed this way. So it's a sack outlet, or it's just a way to like, well, someone board wiped, I might as well draw 4 cards. Really solid. Tybalt's Trickery is kind of the spell version of a Chaos Warp for spells, in its way to counter things in red as well. We had 2 votes for Stinging Study, which we mentioned in our show. Ink Shield, which is a ridiculously good card. Mystic Reflection is a way to turn a thing that comes into play into either the best thing in play or the worst thing in play, depending on whether or not you want to use it offensively or defensively. There's Cloth's Will, which is one of those kind of versions of the cards from Commander Legends, this time for Cloth, which is you can choose one or both modes if you control your commander, and he can deal X damage to each creature without flying or destroy up to X target artifacts or enchantments. That's a really solid card in a Gruul deck for sure. It's, kind of a way to hit multiple things or get rid of creatures that don't have flying if you're playing red-green dragons. And there's Harness Infinity was the last one here suggested, which is a card. I don't even see it. Harness Infinity?
Yeah.
That was great. Which is
there it
a card.
It is a card.
Just cut it there. We're good.
And lastly, we have Harness Infinity, which is an instant from Strixhaven. 1 triple black and triple green, and you exchange your graveyard in hand and exile it. I kind of forgot this card was a thing, but this was when it first was released, people were kind of going crazy about it.
I have been blown out by this card before.
I don't know if I've seen it cast yet. What deck did you get hammered with it, Max?
It was in one of John Egner's, one of his like 4 Zoni decks, I think. He runs it in one of them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Ink Shield, I think, is one for sure worth mentioning again, because it also had a couple votes, but that card is insane. It's, everything that you'd want. It's both a fog effect and a win condition, kind of. You drop it at the right time, you're just gonna, not only are you not gonna die, you're gonna kill everyone in the next turn with all those Inklings that you made. So yeah, that's a super cool card.
Dana, have you tried Semester's End yet?
I ran it for a short period of time in my Jeru deck. The problem I had with it, in Jeru was fine it's good to blink Jeru. That's useful, but I don't have a ton of other creatures in that deck. It's only a couple creatures. So basically it wound up being expensive just to hit Jeru. And with the Planeswalkers, you could use it on occasion to save a Planeswalker, so someone would go to hit it, and I would blink it away and protect it. But a couple different times it wound up being a situation where, I'd save the Planeswalker, but it would reset down to the amount of damage it was going to maybe take anyway, because it was at, I'd already put like 3 or 4 counters on it, and someone's going to hit it with a 3/3, and I'm like, well, I could blink it, but that's not going to really do me any good. It doesn't change very much. So at least the limited experience I had with it in the one deck I ran it didn't really do what I wanted to do, and I wound up swapping it back out for something else. But I can totally imagine there are some decks where it works way better than it did in mine.
I feel like this card would work great with all the downtick Planeswalkers from like War of the Spark. Like, I wonder why this card wasn't printed back in War of the Spark when all those Planeswalkers only had minus abilities that you saw. So, interesting, though.
Or I wonder about something like your Brago deck, where you do have a bunch of creatures that you want to blink. Well, and your Planeswalkers too are ones that you're usually not too concerned about them getting to their ults. Whereas that's how I win in my Jeru deck, is I need to ult Planeswalkers. You just want to draw a card off every one of those Teferis and Jaces and stuff in that deck. So you don't care if you reset them, basically.
Yeah. I wish they came back sooner than the end step, because then you could use them again.
Exactly, yeah, that's the downside. Right, in this case, you'd have to, if you want to use it for value and not for saving stuff, you have to cast it after you already use your Brago abilities, and then do it basically one more time, but it doesn't really get you anything new, other than resetting stuff, so.
Yeah.
How about you, Chris? Any of these you jump out at you that you want to talk about quick?
No, I'm just mad that Tipple's Trickery is banned in Modern.
For good reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's not no reason, for sure.
Modern's like the new Legacy. You're supposed to let the stupid broken things be, unbanned. That's
maybe
just how it's supposed to be.
Maybe they'll give you guys back Splinter Twin.
Oh, I would be all over that. I bought a play set of them as soon as it got banned, just waiting for the day they unban it.
Nice. Why don't you tell us what our sorcery suggestions were here from listeners?
All right, so our sorceries were Vanquish the Hordes, Culling Ritual, which is a super powerful card. I actually saw someone play that the other day, and I'm like, maybe ridiculous. I should play this more often. Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Expressive Iteration, Haunting Voyage, Fevered Suspicion, Revival Experiment, Crackle with Power, Incarnation Technique, Search for Glory, Reckless Impulse, and Pest Infestation. Immediately, I see quite a few cards on here that I recognize just by their names. I have to look them up. Like Tasha's Hideous Laughter, I've seen that played a lot. Expressive Iteration is probably the most common of all the cards that I've seen played. Between Standard and Modern, I've seen it played. I've seen it played in a couple of Commander games. Wouldn't be surprised if they're playing it in Legacy of some sort. The ability to look at 3 cards and then get 1 to your hand, 1 into exile, which you can probably cast anyways, is just huge.
I have seen it played in Legacy and or Vintage even. Same with Tasha's Hideous Laughter, where in those formats, you just deck someone with it. Their CMC is so low, if you get that spell off, they just lose their library.
I mean, even people playing in Commander, if you're playing a really tightly tuned deck, your CMC is only the curve runs up to 3 or something like that. You don't even maybe a couple 4-drops in there. Someone drops it on you, and you're just like, this is gonna hurt.
Yeah, that card is super, and it's an exile effect, so you're not worried about putting stuff in their graveyard that they can use against you.
Yeah, which is really powerful. I know one of the people who works at the store with me, Ben Johnston, he plays Incarnation Technique. I believe that's that black 5-mana sorcery, something like that lets you tell someone, you mill so many cards and you get to return X amount of creatures and stuff like that. Pretty dumb card.
Yeah, and you have the demonstrate option where you get to copy it if you want to let an opponent copy it too.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
really
the greatest
solid.
part is you target someone who you know is not playing a whole lot of creatures,
Right.
and then you're just like, yeah, you can bring back, those 2 1/1s, and I'm gonna bring back these 2 7-drops that are gonna like just win the game.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Baleful Masteries briefly under the instance. Baleful Mastery, where you can only cast it for 2 mana, but if it lets someone draw a card, that's just never mattered for me. Like, there's been multiple times where not only where I've, first of all, given the card to somebody who was so far behind it didn't matter, or I've given it to the person I'm about to kill. Like, I will swing at somebody and like, okay, I'm swinging at you for lethal. Before damage is dealt, I'm going to remove a third person's creature and then let you draw the card. And then you draw your card and then you die. Like that. I've done that multiple times. Like, that just doesn't matter there. And it's the same thing is somewhat true with Incarnation Technique. You can use it to have somebody help you out and say, hey, let's make a deal. I'll let you, bring a creature back if you help me take care of this problem. Or you can just give it to somebody who's not going to do anything or has no creatures or, again, who you're going to kill.
Yeah.
You can play around that really easily.
I've seen it a lot of times when I've seen someone play this, they usually choose the person who's way far behind in the game because they're trying to get them into the game per se, so they actually get to play. So they'll choose them, and I've actually seen them whiff on that, and they're just like, well, I'm trying to help you. There's only so much I can do for you.
Right. It's not my fault. Vanquish the Horde, which is the 6 mana, 6 double white, and it costs 1 less to cast for each creature in the battlefield. So functionally, it's a 2 mana Day of Judgment. Basically, it's almost always going to get cast for 2 mana. It's just ridiculous. Like, I don't have it in every white deck, but it's one of those cards where I just know that every time I make a white deck, it's going to be thrown in the list while I figure out, maybe the deck will wind up working better with other board wipes or whatever, who knows. But like, every white deck you're going to consider it. I think it's that good.
That's true.
I find it really funny when comparing this to like Blasphemous Act, where Blasphemous Act is 1 more mana, 2 more colorless mana, and it doesn't even destroy everything. It just gives everything 13 damage.
In Blasphemous Act is pretty frequently just a single red, whereas this is always going to at best be 2. But this is going to kill it. Like, there's absolutely, Max. There's been plenty of times someone's like done something stupid. Hey, I've got a 14 Hydra or a 26 Hydra or whatever. I don't know why I picked 14. They would still survive. But like, people play giant creatures or make giant creatures that Blasphemous Act doesn't kill sometimes. That's happened, I bet, to all of us. Vanquish Horde just kills them every time. And it's easier to get under the threshold too. Like, reducing 6 mana is way easier than reducing the 12 you need to do in Blasphemous Act. I've cast plenty of Blasphemous Acts for like 4 or 5 mana because I've just needed to cast it. This is almost always just going to be double white.
Yeah.
Haunting Voyage is a way to, like, basically you're bringing back the creatures of a creature type from your graveyard to play. I mean, if you're playing a black tribal deck, it's probably worth running in every black tribal deck. Bring your thing back, and if you foretell it, bring I think 2 things back on the foretell. I mean, that's really, really solid.
Yeah, it's not bad at all. The only downside to like this card is that there are just better versions of it out there. In what is it, Patriarch's Bidding?
Yeah.
I know there was another one I was thinking of too. And that's the only downfall when they make cards like this that are really, really good. Is you just look at the history of the other cards and you're like, oh well, there's this one, and it's just strictly better in general.
The problem with Patriarch's Bidding is I have on occasion ran into that situation where you're playing a tribal deck and you want to use Patriarch's Bidding, and someone else is too, and you're like, oh, I bring my stuff back, they're going to bring back 6 dragons. Whereas like Haunting Voyage is only your stuff, but still, I mean, yeah, it gets 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's still a really, really solid card.
Yes.
So yeah, I totally get why that one was suggested here. Pest Infestation was one I was a little bit surprised to see.
That's the black-green one that creates 2 pests, right?
It's green double X, destroy up to X target artifacts or enchantments, and you create twice X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens.
I was thinking of something else.
So if you spend 5 mana on it, you will create 4 of those pests, which is still pretty good, and you're destroying 2 artifacts or enchantments in the process. It's a pretty good trade, but I think it's a kind of card that you probably only want to run in a deck that's doing things with tokens, like if you're sacrificing tokens or you have some added synergy there.
Or you're playing a deck that's playing a lot of big mana, and you don't really have, much areas to put the mana into. And this is actually something our new Patreon, Kyle Balco, who came in yesterday. I was at the store, and we're talking, and he's like, yeah, I can make, all this mana in this deck. And we're like, play the X card that you hate, Dana, the black one. And he was like, no, I don't want to do that. So we're looking
Torment of Hailfire.
Yeah, we're looking at other cards, like what could you use, this excessive amount of mana on? And this would be something, that people could do. If you want to avoid, like the auto win cons, let's put it into something like this where it's just like, well, I'll just destroy all the artifacts and enchantments on the board, and then I'm going to create all these tokens, and hey, at least I got to use my mana on something.
Right, exactly. It's always good to have mana sinks, especially in those decks that can make a ton of it, for sure. Before we move to artifacts, Max, any of these particularly jump out at you that you want to mention?
I mean, I talked about Calling Ritual a lot last week, or during the Rifties, so 2 weeks ago. I'm shocked that Expressive Iteration's a $7 uncommon, but
No kidding.
You guys say it's like in Legacy, in Vintage, that makes sense then. It's like $6.50 according to Scryfall.
The big thing about Expressive Iteration, it's the same as the 2-mana black one out of, I think it's AFR, that you sacrifice a creature and create a treasure token and draw 2 cards or whatever, is that the pull rate on them is dumb. Like, we've gone through, like 2 or 3 boxes and only pulled like maybe 1 or 2 a box. So,
Wow.
I mean, that's another reason why it's driving prices that dumb.
I remember a Fatal Push being the same way when like everyone wanted to run it in a bunch of decks, and it had a weird drop rate for an uncommon that was way less than a lot of other uncommons. Yeah, Expressive Iteration is like, that's a ridiculous amount of value for 2 mana. You're basically drawing the bet. It's kind of a scry. You're basically like looking at 3 kind of and taking the best 2 that you can probably play that turn for 2 mana. That's really good compared to what we usually get for draw effects.
Yeah, and it's not like you lose any of the cards either.
Right.
It's 1 to hand, 1 to the bottom of the deck, and 1 to exile. So obviously you're exiling the card that you can play, unless you randomly get that 3 cards where it's like, oh, these are all crappy. Like, which one do I not want type of thing.
Yeah, super, super solid. I'm a big fan of that card. Max, why don't you go over the artifacts here with us?
For the artifacts, we have Moon Silver Key, Cursed Mirror, Esper Sentinel, Sword of Hearth and Home, Strixhaven Stadium, Archaeomancer's Map, Liquimetal Torque, Bag of Tricks, the Celestius, and then Colossal Plow.
Colossal Plow.
So the first one I want to talk about here is, and it got the most suggestions, the most votes, was Sword of Hearth and Home. That card is insane. And we talked about it when it came out, but I don't think I can stress how insane that card is. It just does all the things you want to do. And honestly, right now, you can pick up copies for like $11, and we are not a finance podcast. However, I don't, unless that card gets reprinted in the very near future, that is not going to be available for $11 in a year. It's just too good.
Yes.
And they keep printing different, like, commanders that care about equipment, and every one of those commanders, if someone builds a new deck, they're going to put swords in, and this sword is amazing. It's, it just does everything you want from a piece of equipment like this. It's fantastic, and I'm not at all surprised it got 4 votes for artifacts.
I definitely think it's probably the second best sword for commander purposes, in my opinion.
And there's a lot of good competition there.
Yeah, obviously Feast and Famine is probably the best sword in commander, and I think this is probably number 2 right behind it.
It's really, really good. Strixhaven Stadium is kind of an easy one to forget about. Number 1, because you forget it's a mana rock, but it is. You tap and add a colorless mana to your mana pool, and you put a point counter on it. And then whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, you remove a point counter. So that's not ideal. However, whenever a creature you control deals damage to an opponent, you put a point counter on it. And if it has 10 or more point counters on it, you remove them all, and that player loses the game. So it's like, in a token deck, it's a way to kill somebody. In addition to being a mana rock, it's not even like it's a card you have to play and then hope you get your win condition. You can play this on turn 3 and just not care about it at all because you're using it for a mana rock. And then when you get to that point in the game where, okay, I'm going to make a move, now I'm going to kill somebody with this. It's just a really, really good card that at any point in the game, you're probably fine drawing in the right deck.
Yeah, I do love these alternate win conditions like that.
Yeah.
It's not a overall I win, it's a you lose.
Yep.
And those are the win conditions that I like.
Yeah. A Vorpal Sword I've loved this year for the same reason. The Archaeomancer's Map, I think we talked about plenty, and it's been as good as I kind of had thought it would be, and you guys as well as everyone thought it would be. I've really been happy to see that card whenever I've drawn it. In Liquimetal Torque, though, I will say, I think we talked about how good that card was. That's the 2-mana rock that taps for a colorless, and you can make things into an artifact. That card's just dumb. I've seen so many crazy things, so many crazy plays with that card. I love everything about it. That's one of my all-time favorite cards, and I'm glad to see other people agree how good that card has been this year.
I'm a big fan of Cursed Mirror, even though I don't have a red deck. I see that card just go off in a lot of your decks, Dana.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not one of those 3-mana rocks that, like, if you're playing red, it can do stupid things. There's been multiple times in games where someone's played their commander with a tap ability, and they have to wait a turn to use it, and they pass a turn, and I'm like, I'm going to play the Cursed Mirror as a copy of your commander, and I can immediately use the ability.
Mm-hmm.
that feels so good to use someone else's commander before they can, get some value off it, and then it's still a mana rock after that every turn. It's one of those cards where there's just almost no downside to it in a red deck other than, hey, it's at the 3 mana slot versus the 2 mana slot.
Yeah, but red needs all the help they can get. I mean, I wish they'd start giving white stuff like that instead of, let's give them these crappy, we're going to give you pseudo mana ramp, I guess, but you can't play the land this turn. You got to wait another turn to play another one.
You can have Colossal Plow. That's white. That was a weird one. Colossal Plow, maybe I had to relook because I remember seeing it at the time, and I didn't remember what it did, so I had to go look it up. Yeah, that was one I was a little bit surprised to see. Has anyone actually seen that pop up in a deck?
Nope.
Because that was back in Kaldheim, I believe, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where... Did I play this in a draft once, maybe? I don't even remember where I've played this card before, but it had to have been draft. It's the only time I think I've ever seen it.
Well, it's a 2 mana vehicle for a 6/3 with Cruise 6. And when it attacks, you add 3 mana to your mana pool, 3 white mana, and you gain life, and the mana doesn't go away until the turn. So you gain 3 mana when you attack with it, but man, Cruise 6 feels pretty steep. I guess it is a 6/3, but that's just an odd one to have seen here. But maybe there's some cool combo with it in some deck that I'm not aware of, and I just don't know how useful it is in that build.
I mean, maybe it's just something to sink a bunch of tokens into,
Yeah,
sure. My tokens aren't that good, so I'll put them into this to swing for 6, and if it dies, it dies. I still gain 3, mana and 3 life, and then I can do other stuff.
Yeah, could be. All right, we can move on to the enchantments here next. We had Paladin class, and I might as well read the rest. We also had Bard class that got mentioned, and Wizard class. So the class enchantments from the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms were very popular with people, which is, and I get that. I loved all of those. I think I'm only running 1 or 2 in decks, but like almost every one of them were cards where I read the card and was like, oh, I know what deck wants that. Oh, I know what deck wants that one. And they're all super fun too. I thought those were a really nice design, and I'm glad to see that the listeners like them as well. We had Paradox Zone, which was the green enchantment that comes into play with a growth counter on it. And at the beginning of your end step, you double the number of growth counters on Paradox Engine, and then you make a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, and you put X +1 counters on it, where X is the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone. So it just makes you fractals. They get bigger and bigger. And if you're playing that kind of like token counter deck, I mean, this is probably really good friends with Doubling Season if you happen to have them both out simultaneously.
Gross.
So
very gross.
I am gonna kind of crap on green here a little. I know it's pretty rare when I do this.
Yes.
Why do they get the better Assemble the Legion?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, basically, yes.
This is Assemble the Legion, but you get it at your end step instead of your upkeep.
Yeah, and it's cheaper than some Legion 6 mana. This is 5, I believe, right?
I think it's 6, but for sure it's double colors. It's red white. This is at least make this double green. Like, why did they get the fixed one? Because
it's green and that's Boros, and you got to dump on Boros.
Green's the best color.
Or make it green blue because they're green blue fractals.
Right? Yes.
Because that's what Simic needs. More Simic things.
The Meathook Massacre, which we talked about plenty last week, that is a multi-format all-star. Urza's Saga, which we talked about as a land, but it is technically an enchantment too. That had a couple votes here. Unnatural Growth, which is just a crazy powerful card. Hallowed Haunting, Search Supremacist, and Binding of the Old Gods rounds out our enchantments. Any of these you want to talk about besides Paradox Zone, Max?
I don't know what half of these are, so... Bind Old Gods. Let's just search that. There we go.
That one I was curious about too.
Oh, it's a saga. So, Chapter 1, destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Chapter 2, search for a forest and put it on the library. Put it on the battlefield tapped. And then Chapter 3 is creatures you control gain Death Touch until end turn. That seems interesting. I mean, 4 mana destroy a permanent is not bad. I mean, and yeah, we talked about the Paladin classes back when they came out. I think the only one I run right now, though, is Wizard, just because of the maximum hand size clause on it.
Sure.
Oh, I suppose, yeah. That is actually a really good one. I personally like Ranger class the best. It spits out a token when it comes out, you put counters on, and then you get to play cards from top of your library for the 3rd chapter of it. I mean, that's my favorite one of those.
I liked Warlock class too. There's just a bunch of those were really, really good and interesting.
Of course you like Warlock. When we played World of Warcraft, that's what you played was Warlock.
Well, you're correct. Hallowed Haunting is a good card. That's the enchantment for 2 white. And if you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have flying and vigilance. And whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you create a white spirit creature token with its power and toughness equal to the number of spirits you control. I don't have a deck that wants this, but like that's a really solid card too.
Wouldn't it just be good in your overall Enchantress deck?
I don't
just
have
for
that
the simple fact of that it's a 4-mana enchantment that when you cast another enchantment, you start creating tokens then?
Yeah, maybe, but like I have there's a couple other like token makers, creatures that make tokens when you create enchantments. Sigarda already has flying, and there's a handful of enchantments to give her vigilance anyway. So I thought about it in there, but I looked at it, I was like, a couple of the things on here wound up being redundant in that deck just because of how Sigarda works. Whereas in a different deck, I think it might work much better. I think this would probably be much better in the that black-white Daxos deck.
Okay.
Because I believe his creatures are also spirits. And it's more of a like go wide-ish deck. It would probably be really good in there.
I actually like this deck, and I hope people, we talked about this, God, it must have been a couple months ago, we were talking about Pillow Fort. And I think that this would be a good card in Pillow Fort because it gives them a win con then.
Sure.
It's already playing all the enchantments and stuff, like to protect themselves or to give people extra cards, so why not have something that's giving them double duty?
All right, Chris, why don't you take us to the Planeswalkers here?
So Planeswalkers, we have Dakin's Shadow Slayer. I'm gonna horribly butcher her name, but her name is Lolith. I can never pronounce it properly. I might have to like wiki this one day. But we have the Spider Queen, Kaya Geist Hunter, Grist the Hunger, Renin 7, Professor Onyx, Chandra Dressed to Kill, Tybalt Cosmic Imposter, and Kaya the Inexorable. Tybalt Cosmic Imposter. Is that the black-red one?
Yes.
That was the flip one? Yeah. That one, pretty good. I've been blown up by that card. So glad they changed the rules in Modern that you can't cascade into that card anymore, because that saved me quite a few times. The rest of them, I think they're all pretty good Planeswalkers, to be honest with you. They're not as powerful as we've seen in years before, but it's definitely good Planeswalkers.
I like Professor Onyx quite a bit in the one deck where I run her. I like Red and 7 in the deck where I run them. I have seen Grist probably half a dozen times so far, and it's always fun. Like, I think Grist is a super fun card, and every time I've seen it get played, it's just interesting and interactive and always doing things, and I like that a lot as well.
I think I only personally play one of these, and that's the Spider Queen, because she's in my Spider deck. So
I was just Spider Queen. Ask.
The one I've kind of had bad luck with is Chandra Dressed to Kill. I had it in my Anax deck for a while because she has an impulse draw on her. However, the caveat on the impulse draw is it has to be a red card, which means any of your lands you can't play the lands, and you can't play any mana rock artifacts. So my mono red deck, I just whiff way too much. I was surprised how often I was whiffing. And that always feels bad when you're like, okay, I'll play this impulse draw, and I'm like, oh, there's a land, and I need a land, and I can't play the land. And next turn you're like, and there's my Soul Ring. And then turn after that, you're like, and there's a land again. I'm like, come on, she's done nothing for me for 3 straight turns while you're trying to protect her. So I wound up taking her out of that deck. That part was frustrating for me, but there's probably different decks where she does work much better.
Yeah, I suppose. I didn't even think about that it has to be red.
It has to be red, yeah. How about you, Max? Any of these you ran into? You don't play a lot of Planeswalkers necessarily.
I do not. I've seen you play a bunch of these, like Professor Onyx and whatnot. The Kayas kind of interest me a little bit, but they don't do much for what my decks are doing at the time.
Sure. Well, why don't you go over the creatures then, Max?
Creatures. Okay, we have the Doffy Voidwalker, Sereth the Viper's Fang, Esper Sentinel, Froghemoth, Stormkiln Artist, Timeless Witness, Guardian of Faith, Old Gnawbone, Keen Duelist, and Harmonic Prodigy.
So Doffy Voidwalker is a card that has text on it that looks like it's back from Alpha, because it's just so many words.
Yes.
It has Shadow, and if a card will be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you exile it with a Void counter on it. And then you can sacrifice the Voidwalker to choose an exiled card an opponent controls with a Void counter on it, and you can play that card without paying its mana cost. But that's just a crazy piece of value on a 2-mana creature. And it's a 3/2 that can't be blocked on top of it. That card's insane. Does it get played in other formats, Chris?
It gets played in Modern a lot.
It's from Modern Horizon, so it doesn't surprise me there for sure. Like, that's just a really, really good card.
Yeah, there's like there's like a red-black deck that runs around that specifically is all about discarding stuff and that. And of course, that card's got to be in there.
Sure. Esper Sentinel had multiple votes. Obviously, a really great piece of value. Stormkiln Artist is a crazy card. It doesn't even need to get +1/+0 for each artifact you control. That's just a bonus, but that's another one of those fantastic uncommons that's super, super good. Max, we talked about Old Novel and plenty last week.
We can keep talking about him.
You're welcome to talk about it again if you want to.
It's the best green card printed this year. We're good. Move on.
I mean, it is so good, although Sereth, the Viper's Fang, is no slouch. Other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch, so basically most of your attackers now have Death Touch. Untapped creatures you control have Hexproof, which is crazy useful. And you can untap another target creature or land you control for a single mana. Also crazy useful. The 2 different times I've gotten Sereth out in my Recce deck, I've had Nykthos out. So I've been able to... So she comes out... protects Recce. I tap Nykthos for 11 or something, and then spend 1 to untap it and tap it again. Super, super good. So yeah, that card's just phenomenal for a rare too. And this is also one of those cards where I think it's at like $1.50 or something right now. And in a couple of years, everyone's like, when did Sereth turn into a $12 card or something?
Yes.
I actually quite like Froghemoth too. That card does a lot of work.
It's a scavenging ooze on steroids is what that is.
Yeah.
Like something happened to that scavenging ooze.
Exactly.
All of a sudden it transformed.
I
thought that was that new ooze from Zendikar Rising.
Which one was that?
The one that replicates itself over and over. The one that broke Arena.
I actually played against that deck once in Arena, and literally my PC, I could hear it sounding like it was about to explode as everything was going on. So I just went up and clicked the concede button. I'm like, I don't need this right now.
I mean, Timeless Witness is great. There's a bunch of great green creatures in this list.
Yes, all these creatures are extremely good.
Yeah.
I mean, I guarantee that there's probably a dozen more of them that could have made this list
absolutely
as well.
Well, so since we're talking about creatures, Chris, why don't you go over the picks for commanders from our listeners?
So we have Adelaine. You said it was Resplendent Cathar, correct, Max?
Correct.
Okay. And then we have Prosper Tomebound, Brina the Demagogue. Probably spelled this, pronounce that wrong too, but whatever. Cody Vociferous Codex, Carthalion, Grist the Hunger Tide, Ruxa Patient Professor, Renoya, Fire Dancer, Willow Dusk, Essence Seer, Eskia, God of the Tree, Alibu. Dana, I'm going to have to yell at you right now.
I'm adding the notes as Chris is reading.
Yes, you are, and your name pops up above it, and I lose what I'm reading, so I'm like, I was just about to read that. So I will start over right here. So we have Alibu, Ancient Witness, Chatterfang, Squirrel General, Veyron, Voice of Duality, and Raynar, the Ever Watchful.
And every one of those is a commander that I'm not surprised to see people like. Those are just all really, really good cards.
Well, I think so.
I'm assuming show editor Rafael Garcia was one of the ones who voted for Ruxa, Patient Professor, given it's a bear.
It's such a good card, though. I mean, just in general, it made that bear deck better. Like, you had other bear commanders and everything, but that one just pretty much made that deck viable now, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, you had what is it? Ayla or whatever it was, the other bear lady. And that was cool and everything, but then when Ruxa come out, you just immediately, it's like, no, this is the one. This is the one that everyone's been looking for.
Rhyona is a crazy strong commander. That's the one, at the beginning of combat, you create X tokens that are copies of another creature you control, where X is 1 plus a number of instants and sorceries you've cast this turn. So you always get 1 token of a creature, and they have haste. But if you've cast a couple spells and drawn a few cards or whatever, you might make 3 or 4 tokens. So if this deck is probably running a bunch of stuff with good ETBs, and you're going to get at least 1 copy of that, if not 2 or 3 or more, depending on how your deck is built. That gets, having played against this deck a few times, it gets out of control really easily and really quickly. Any fun games you guys have played against any of these commanders or notable ones you want to talk about? Anything that you'd run into, Max?
I've played against a Brina deck. In fact, our new patron Kyle has a Brina deck. It's fun to play against. I've never played against a Cody deck. I actually haven't played against a lot of these. I played against a couple Eskia decks, but they're either God Tribal or just big creature tribal, which are always fun to play against.
Sure.
I've played against a few Chatterfang decks as well. Those are sometimes fun and sometimes grueling to play against. And I played against a Raynar deck, but yeah, these are all fun things to run into, and I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen a lot of these on this list, so it'd be cool to see.
Matt Morgan has an Alabu deck, and that really can hit you in the face real hard, really easily with the X damage to any target, and you scry or X's number of tapped artifacts you control. That's really easy to take like 8 or 9 to the face from that, and then scry down 8 or 9 is really good too.
I am very surprised that, like in the store on Tuesdays, I'll walk around and see what everyone's playing. And I haven't seen a lot of the Lebu decks out there. Like everyone talked about it, but yet you don't see it quite as often as what I thought I would.
Because you can't get the deck.
Is that true?
That was the one that everybody bought right away, that and the Orzhov one, because Boros one had the Archaeomancer's map in it.
Yep.
Okay.
And the black-white one had Ink Shield.
Yeah.
I have all of these sitting sealed in my office. Because, I order all the commander decks. I have yet to crack them. I didn't realize it was that hard to find.
Yeah, that one's the tricky one.
I'll let people know that I have one if they're really interested. So
every year is one of those decks that like has the 1 or 2 cards everyone wants, so it just disappears off shelves everywhere.
Yeah, Fierce Guardianship.
Yep. Yes, indeed. That always happens. So yeah, these are all a really good collection of commanders. The ones I've ran into, I've played against most of these at least once. A lot of Brina decks. I have played at least one Cody, at least one Will of Dusk, and Will of Dusk is really good. Chatterfang multiple times, and that can both play as a fun casual deck, and it can be a really strong combo deck. Veyran's really good too. These are all just really, really strong commanders that are all interesting too. Most of them don't feel like those kind of busted narrow commanders we were getting a few years back that were super powerful. A lot of these strong ones are also like pretty unique and cool too, which I think Wizards has really figured out how to make strong commanders that aren't necessarily busted and also are fairly interesting.
Yeah, I definitely gotta say, out of all of them on this list, I think Chatterfang is probably the most popular one.
Probably.
The most hyped one that ever came out this year.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Prosper talk to, and we talked about Prosper last week.
Yep.
And again, I'm glad to see Grist on here. That's always a fun commander to see whenever I played against it. So, and these are all really good choices. I mean, it was just a really good year for commander cards, I think, in general.
Oh, that's an understatement.
Yeah.
And next year we're gonna have another Commander Legend, so it's probably gonna be amazing next year as well.
Exactly. Yeah. 2021 was great. We're gonna get a lot of good stuff in 2022 as well. Any final thoughts from anybody before we wrap this show up?
I'm happy that this year is over, to be honest with you. That's my final thought.
I hear you.
It was so much, that going on. It was hard to keep track of everything, and I guess I'm kind of looking forward to next year and hoping that maybe it's a little more tame. But I highly doubt it.
I'm a little re-energized after my Christmas break here and ready to go, so I'm ready for it. How about you, Max?
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm glad that year is over. I don't see the product supply slowing down at all this year, but at least we can learn from last year and be a little more prepared, figure out what we do and do not want to really look at if it doesn't, tickle our fancy.
For sure. All right, everyone, that is going to wrap up episode 301 of Commander Central. Our show was edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find them on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bearwalker. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at Wise Squishy 1. We will be back next week with episode 302. Until then, I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.